Welcome to the local campaign, and thank you for joining us for this debate in Ward 7, Bay Ward. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce the 5 candidates who are running for election in Bay Ward. They are all here for this debate, but first I will go over the rules for our discussion today. We're going to start with opening statements. They will each have 1 minute to speak to you, the voters, and then after that we'll get into some debates on the key issues of the election in Bay Ward and throughout the city of Ottawa. For each debate topic, I'm going to introduce it with a question directed at one of the candidates. That candidate will have 45 seconds to address the question, respond to the question on his or her own. Then we'll move into an open debate lasting several minutes in which all of the candidates will have an opportunity to participate, to offer their views, challenge each other, ask each other questions, make statements about the issue. And then we'll wrap up with the candidate to whom the question was originally directed having 30 seconds to close off that topic. We'll move through a number of different debate topics that way. Each candidate will get one question, and then we'll move to closing statements, which will be in the reverse order of the opening statements, and the order for all of that was determined at random before our telecast. So let's introduce the candidates for our debate in Bay Ward. They are Theresa Kavanagh, Erica Dath, Marc Lugert, Don Dransfield, and Trevor Robinson. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here for the debate in Bay Ward. And let's start with the opening statement from Theresa Kavanagh. Go ahead.
Well, thanks very much, Marc. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to run for City Council for Bay Ward. That's why the very first day when the registration opened, I was there. This is where I raised my sons. This is where I serve as a school board trustee for the last 8 years. And this is where I choose to live. This is a very exciting community that has a lot of potential. It also has a lot of things that need to be protected. It has wonderful communities, unique communities. It has amazing parks and green spaces. We want to work together and keep those special things special right here in Bay Ward. LRT is coming to Bay Ward. That's very important. It's great, and we're going to have a state-of-the-art transit system. But let's not forget, we also need local service, such as the number 11 route. People still need to get to their shopping right now, so let's keep that. The LRT also means new development. We need to get the communities involved, such as Lincoln Fields. Let's get them involved, and let's see what we can do together.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Erica Dath. Go ahead, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Marc, and hello, Bay Ward. On October 22nd, Bay Ward, you have the ability to vote on change. I want to be that change. I am a no-nonsense, pragmatic straight shooter, an innovative problem solver, critical thinker, and strong and capable woman. I'm an independent political voice. This will be important to you. Being independent means that never will political leanings or party politics come at the expense of common sense and logic when I'm making decisions at City Hall. On your doorsteps, I have heard you express concerns, issues, and desire for change. I am listening, and I want to be your voice. My name is Erica Dath, and I'm a new voice with a fresh perspective. And I look forward to sharing my thoughts with you today and in the days to come, so that on election night, when you select me to represent you as your next city councillor, you can be confident that you've made the right choice.
All right, thank you. Marc Lugert, you're next. Go ahead, you have 1 minute.
It's great to be here, Marc, and thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Marc Lugert, and I seek the opportunity to serve you as your next councillor for Bay Ward. This great ward, with its vibrant neighbourhoods, is what my family and I call home for many years. As a longtime community activist, a former chair of the Queensway Terrace North Community Association, I experienced firsthand how our voices were not heard, how our issues were not addressed, and our concerns and wishes were not met by our elected officials. Over the past decade, neighbours lost trust in decision makers at City Hall. As your neighbour and as your next city councillor, I will restore that trust and will create transparency for all of us. Our ward is facing a large project in the years to come. It is time that we say how they are being planned and executed. After all, strong neighbourhoods make for a proud city.
All right, thank you. Don Dransfield, you're up next. You have 1 minute. Go ahead.
I have over 30 years of experience in small business, and I want to bring that to City Hall. I'll make my decisions based on listening to people and using our money wisely. I will partner with small business, community organizations, associations, nonprofits, and other levels of government to find common solutions. I will tap into the energy of the ideas of our young people. I'll work with local businesses to create the networking and learning opportunities that will help youth in Bay Ward to find good jobs. We've faced lots of challenges challenges: an aging population, public safety, crumbling infrastructure, and needs for more transit, housing, affordable childcare, recreation, and the protecting of our green spaces. We have an opportunity with the LRT Phase 2 and the redevelopment of Lincoln Fields and Carlingwood to bring the community together for a long-term vision that will draw revitalized business and recreational opportunities to our mature neighborhoods. But we need to get it right, and that means listening to our local communities.
All right, thank you. Finally, Trevor Robinson, you're next.
Thanks, Marc. I want to just take a quick moment to pay respects. Today is 9/11. Pay respects to those who have lost their lives on that day and the days since, especially our first responders and military members. I've lived in Bay Ward all my life. I'm the only returning candidate in the ward for the 2018 election. My priority, like most people, is family. So one of the questions that was asked is why I waited to put my nomination papers in. And that was because family is a priority and there was a death in the family. If you're looking for someone who has fresh perspective, someone who has experience representing 3 times the size of Bay Ward, someone who's driven, down to earth, and forward thinking, vote for Trevor Robinson in October. You have 6 different days that you're able to vote, so it's nice and convenient, and I welcome the opportunity, and I'm honored to be a returning candidate in this ward.
All right, thank you. Thank you to all the candidates for your opening statements. Let's get into some debates now on the important topics in Bay Ward and throughout the city of Ottawa for the next 4 years. I'll start with a question directed to Theresa Kavanagh. And let's talk about light rail. As you mentioned, it is coming to Bay Ward. It is important. It is expensive. It is the largest infrastructure project in the city's history. And we just learned in the past couple of days before recording this debate that it's going to be late. So what lessons have been learned from this process, do you think, and what do we need to do differently going forward for phases 2 and 3?
Well, Marc, it's very unfortunate that it's going to be delayed again, but we're very happy it is coming. This is something that has been long anticipated by the community. They're waiting for it. It's something that we need. It's something that is going to be an important part of the community. In terms of lessons learned, we have to look at the way this was put together and how we chose who was going to partner with us in this creation of a LRT system. So there's a lot of work to be done in analyzing that information and make sure that we got the best deal for our community. Okay,
it's open to everyone now on this topic.
Well, I believe in general that the process, the way LRT was planned from the onset, has not been quite open. Neighborhoods were overrun and by the decision making and had no say in the decision making at all. Decisions were presented to the neighborhoods. This is what you're getting, and take it or leave it, basically. We have a budget deadline that went off rail. Constant exchange between the city and neighborhoods are basically essential for any future discussions, and we need to guarantee that any delays that happen are actually at zero cost to the taxpayer. And that's where I'm a little worried about, because we are overrunning by budget and time, and the taxpayer will be on hook at the end of the day.
I think overall we would be remiss if we didn't learn from the example of phase 1 before running full speed into phase 2. I think we have an opportunity here not to cancel anything or shelve anything, but to put it on pause, understand some of the mistakes that may have been made in the first phase, learn from those mistakes, and do a better job going into phase 2. I agree with Marc. We could do a better job in terms of open and honest communication, transparency about the process of procurement and other stage developments. I think we can use this pause as an opportunity to revisit the residents, what their needs are, and certainly go forward in a better position to avoid a lot of the stumbling blocks.
I'd like to find out exactly what has caused the delay. I would prefer that if we're going to have a delay, that it be that at least they don't rush things and have any mistakes in building it. This is a very serious project, and it needs to be done properly. As far as the LRT is concerned, I wouldn't want to see it delayed. We've already had that happen 12 years ago. It's at the end of the first stage. They'll be about to start phase 2, and if we delay phase 2, who knows how long that's going to take. I think we need to increase ridership, and I think if we can increase ridership, the more people who use transit, the lower the costs will be, and I think that will help to lower the fares. I know a lot of people are concerned about the cost of fares. Let's get more people on it. Let's get it more efficient.
I think to Don's point, if we didn't take time to learn from the mistakes that we've made in the first phase, we would make decisions ahead of certainty of rolling out phase 2 or portions of phase 2. We can look at Route 11, we can look at layoffs to OC Transpo drivers as an example of us making decisions in anticipation of a result that didn't come to fruition. My view is that we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't recognize and learn from the stumbling blocks and perhaps potential pauses or mistakes of phase 1 before heading into phase 2.
And I agree with Erica. Very important, I believe, is for the neighbours to have a say in how the LRT in any phase, 2, 3, 4, whatever, is going to happen. And they should have a say. And it's like as part of the Queenswood Terrace North community, for example, the LRT is basically cutting right through the neighbourhood without any consultation to neighbours. They were presented, this is what is going to happen. Any objection or other ideas and opportunities by the neighbours were not addressed in any way. Any further expansion of the LRT had to be done in conjunction with the neighbours and what they're having to say to it.
Any large-scale infrastructure project is bound to have delays, it's bound to have hiccups, and common sense dictates that we need to be aware of that going into it. We need to learn from it in the future. We need to build in a buffer so that there's a window there to account for those delays when they do happen. Any infrastructure project, especially one this large, needs to be done responsibly and respectfully of residents and the tax base. What we also need to ensure is that it serves the needs of everybody, not just a specific group or a specific neighborhood. And more importantly, looking at the $1 million fine that was levied against RTG. $1 million on a $2.1 billion project is a drop in the bucket. There's no incentive for them to meet those deadlines.
I think that it's important that we have a safe route, and if the delays are related to safety, then they should be taken seriously. This is a very, very large project. This is something that we want done right. In fact, I think that's crucial to see that it be done right in phase 1 as we move forward to phase 2, and lessons can be learned from that. So I'm hoping that we'll have a very positive experience in terms of making this phase 1 work so that we can move ahead with phase 2. And yes, phase 2 had its bumps big time in terms of the way it consulted with people. That unfortunately is now finished, and I'm sorry for that. We're moving forward, but let's see what we can do in terms of making this the most efficient, cost-effective way of transporting people around Ottawa.
Let me ask you, since the issue came up, where do you stand on transit fares going forward? Should they be frozen to increase the likelihood of people taking transit, or should they continue to increase? They're scheduled now to increase at a rate higher than inflation. So what does everyone think about that?
I think at the very least, they should be frozen just to alleviate the pain of another delay. A project that was supposed to open in May, we're now not really sure when it's going to open. So at the very least, those transit fares should be frozen until at least the summer.
Don mentioned that we should increase ridership, but we cannot increase ridership when a trip from from Bayward to downtown is going to cost like $4 pretty soon, because people are not going to take the train that way. So what we have to do basically is just like we have to look, and it's like at transit is like and not punish the people who are actually going to use the transit, but actually entice them to use it. And we can do that through all kinds of ways on how adjusting the fares. There are like jurisdictions throughout the world who do a very good job in that. And it's also important that we have the population or our residents and our neighbors who are, let's say, more vulnerable to give them like an easy access to use transit as well.
And
we do need to have a pass that is equitable for those with low income. That is a major problem right now. It is unaffordable for people to use the system as it is. And we have to make that so that these people can get jobs, so they can go places. This is very, very important. So when we're raising fares, we have to keep this in mind. Let's get a fair deal for those who can afford it. And also just keep a decent rate for everyone, because it's just basic marketing.
But
people will be turned off if the
Theresa,
price goes up.
What's a decent rate for you? It's like, is $4 a trip a decent rate? I mean,
think that
Uber
we
is
should-
sometimes cheaper. You know, it's like, and that's the concern I have with this whole.
And raising rates right
Fares
now is only going to feel punitive to
Timing
the
and
riders.
efficiency is the bigger issue.
Okay, we're going to have to stop there. Theresa Kavanagh, I asked you the question. You get the final 30 seconds on this.
Fare is something that will turn people off. If you make the price too high, they're not going to want to go and use the transit system. So at the very least, I think we should look at freezing the rate, and we have to look at making it more affordable for those that are vulnerable populations. There's so many people out there who would love to use the transit, but they can't. And we have to work on that together. This is something that has been brought up over and over again, and it's still not resolved.
All right, thank you. Let's move to the next question, which I will direct to Erica Dath. There's no question that Bay Ward has experienced, just as other parts of the city have, an increase in gun violence in the last few years. Should Ottawa join other communities in Canada, including Toronto and Montreal, in asking the federal government for a ban on handguns and assault weapons? And what other steps should be taken to address rising gun violence in the community?
Well, I think I've gone on record to say already that I don't think there's any reason why a household would require an assault rifle or an assault weapon of any kind. If we had a federal ban on handguns, I think that's reasonable, provided people can still be owners, provided that they lock their handguns up at a secured facility, perhaps a range. I'm not a gun owner. I don't know anybody who's a gun owner, so I don't see any reason to arm myself in Ottawa. I think we have a safe city. What we could do is we could increase community-based policing, awareness programs. We could get out there and meet the community so there's a sense of neighborhood feel and care for each other. Overall, I am in agreement and support with a handgun and assault weapon ban.
Okay, it's open to everyone on the topic of gun violence.
This is something that, there was one night where I went to bed and I heard gunshots in the distance, and I knew my husband was coming home by bus, walking down the street where those gunshots took off. That's pretty scary. That's something that really makes you think. And so, yes, I don't have a problem with restricting guns. This is something that we do not need in the city. This is something that is not necessary. So I would follow the City of Toronto's example on that.
I wouldn't be opposed to a gun ban. However, the fact is, most of the crimes that are committed with handguns are committed with guns that have been smuggled across the border illegally. So I think the key thing is doing more for guns and gangs to make sure that the guns don't get into the hands of the criminals. The federal government allocated $327.6 billion to combat gun and gang violence. And one of the things I would do is work with the federal government and make sure that Ottawa gets its fair share of that money. I do support an increase in the funding to police. We are in the bottom 3 major municipalities for population to police ratio. And I think that we also have to make sure that our police are trained in anti-racism, mental health intervention, implicit bias, and gender and inclusiveness. So.
I believe like law-abiding gun owners are not the problem, and like by banning guns out of cities, we're basically stigmatizing, and our city has a lot of country area as well, are stigmatizing law-abiding gun owners. As Dawn was saying, it's like most of the shootings in 15, 16, and 17 respectively. I mean, in 2015 we had about 46 shootings, in 2017 about 73, and I don't know what this year is going to end up to. Most of these shootings and most of the violence was done with imported guns from outside of Canada, and I believe that is where the problem is, and not the law-abiding gun owners who have guns because they use them as a sport article, like somebody going for golf. And the root of the problem is not the gun itself. I believe the root of the problem, and that's everybody probably agreeing, is that working the Ottawa Police Service needs to work closer with the communities and educate communities and trying to get the potential individuals who might join a gang out of these communities to give them a chance to develop fully.
One of the things that we do know is that oftentimes that gangs are made up of disengaged youth. We need to do something about that. I've worked very closely with a program called Pathways, which was excellent in bringing youth, giving them a chance to do well in school. This is something I did as a school board trustee. When you give kids a chance to graduate from high school and have a potential for post-secondary, you're giving them something that will make them feel good about themselves and move forward. If you do not give them those tools, you're going to have a problem. You're going to have people that are disengaged, and they're going to look for other ways to become engaged, and this is not where we want them to go.
Well, another thing to engage them after school is basically in sports. But like what we do have right now is just like we have sport systems that are not open to these kind of youth. It's just like, I mean, my daughter is playing hockey and at the Girls Hockey Association, and it's horrendous actually how much that costs any individual family. And the same is with soccer, a sport everybody could actually play without much gear. It's like we don't have programs. It's like they're engaging the youth out on the street, and it's like, hey, why don't you come? It's like, let's join the soccer club. Let's go here, and offering that basically free of charge.
And that's the thing. We need to work with our partners in the community at different levels of government. Since amalgamation here in Ottawa, we've seen a decline in the number of police officers per 100,000 residents, not an increase. Our city grows, but our number of police has sort of stayed the same. So there isn't the investigative tools within the police to combat those crimes. We're just being reactive as opposed to being proactive. Beyond that, we need to work with the Ontario government and the federal government to speed up the justice program. Cases are being thrown out because they're sitting in limbo for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Not only does that deter an incentive against anyone who's willing to commit a crime, especially with a gun, but it puts the victims and their families in added pain, and it's unnecessary.
We have to remind ourselves, too, that actually violent acts have actually gone down in the statistics. That is a fact. And so, this is something that's positive, yet it only takes one instance to remind us that these things are still out there, but that actually the numbers are going down. But so this is something that to keep in mind, but we need to keep them going down.
The City of London in England, for example, has had some experience with reducing the potential of having guns at a household. Crime has not gone down, it actually went up after banning handguns. And why is that so? It's because knives are being used now. So crimes are getting more violent, more aggressive, and more person to person, basically. So it's not necessarily that the tool is the problem, it's the root. The root we have to fix. And the issues at the root are, as Theresa was saying as well, is like lie in the communities and the neighborhoods and in the families. And we have to work together to actually get these kids out of these potential dangerous situations.
I think we need to do more for our young people in the community. One of the things I've been trying to get promoted, one of the things I'd like to do is create programs for the young people in the ward so that they are able to learn more information, or where they're able to create more programs for the young people so that they can create.
Great.
Yeah. There's a lot of good programs for kids out there, and I think as Don is saying, it's important to grow them. We have the Boys and Girls Club. We have other programs in our community centers. Let's make them available as much as possible.
And the programs are all well and good, but if residents don't feel that they can easily access them, then that defeats the purpose. If residents, the stats on crime, if they go down, that's great. But if residents don't feel safe in their community or in their home, we've failed them as a city.
I want to partner with small business to make more programs for young people available. A lot of young people are, when I was young, there were a lot of problems in the neighborhood I grew up in where kids were getting into trouble. And by having programs like a teen center, we were able to have less children or young people involved in less crime. And I'd like to do the same thing here by partnering with small business to make sure that young people have homework clubs and things along those lines.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Erica, Dath, I asked you the question, so you get the final 30 seconds to wrap up on this topic.
I think a ban on guns in isolation is not going to solve a problem of violence and crime. I think it needs to work in partnership with community-based policing, with youth programs, with awareness, with safety measures. I think we can all agree that we would want to take measures or input decisions that are going to keep our communities strong, healthy, and safe. I don't believe a gun ban is meant in a punitive sense to those who are law-abiding citizens using them for sport. I just think that in partnership with other programs, they can improve our violence rate.
Okay, thank you. Next question to Marc Lugert. Let's talk about safety on the roads. What specific steps can be taken to make the roads safer for pedestrians and cyclists in Bay Ward and throughout Ottawa?
Well, generally, the problem what we have is we have to eliminate speeding and cutting through residential areas and thereby endangering our neighbors, kids, families who are playing, seniors who are walking along these regions. I personally live in an area where that's happening at a constant level. Every day throughout the week during rush hour, people are sick and tired of standing in line and a jam at the Pinecrest and Carling intersection, trying to get to the highway. So they're cutting through the Queensway Terrace North, sometimes at horrendous speed, because they try to get, I don't know, in front of somebody else, like who's standing in line. So we need to eliminate this cutting through the residential areas and try to open up and still having the traffic flow.
It's open to everyone now. You can keep going if you like, because the time is for everyone now.
The problem is with speeding is that speeding is happening when drivers feel safe. We have to create a feeling among the drivers that when they come along a street, for example, along Crystal Beach, coming in from the outside, some of these drivers that go over 100 kilometers an hour along Carling Avenue, and because they feel safe. It's a wide road. There's no obstacle, nothing. It's like we have to create a feeling of an unsafe road, just a feeling, not creating an unsafe road, and speed will automatically reduce. And that can be done, for example, by planting trees on the median of Carling Avenue, and all of a sudden it's like a driver will look and be a little more careful the way he's driving.
Traffic calming is needed. It's usually born out of frustration on roads. I think we need to look at traffic management, which is an entirely different thing. Perhaps maybe we're over-concentrating our arterial roads and individuals who are frustrated by the commute either to work or home or in between wherever they're trying to go. They cut through side streets in residential areas, like Marc said. Speeding is not necessarily the only issue, but speeding happens when it's 30 kilometers per hour in a residential street. It also happens at 100 kilometers an hour on a highway. I think it is true, we could plant trees, we could narrow the roads, we could put up temporary speed humps, we could do all of those things. We also have to look at how we're designing the roads to support the infrastructure and development coming to our ward. If we don't redesign or we don't manage the roads effectively, and then we do infill that overpopulates the area, we're just going to have a constant reoccurrence of reckless driving through residential areas.
This is probably the number one issue that I have had at the door is concerns about traffic. Traffic calming is probably the number one thing that is requested. And it's a reality. As somebody who's been a school board trustee for 8 years, I've seen the need for it. As kids are trying to get to school, we're needing more crossing guards. We need more lights put in. These are things that are safety measures for our kids to get to school. Okay. So this is something we need now.
Come from the people closest to the problems. When I've been canvassing in certain neighborhoods, like around Fairlawn Plaza, on Fairlawn Road, the people are going, traffic is going from Woodruff Avenue, the north part of Woodruff Avenue, straight through, right to a no-turn area on Lannister Avenue, and then they turn to get to Woodruff. Somebody suggested, one of the people in the ward suggested to me, why don't we make it so that people can't go straight through onto Fairlawn from Woodruff, and so that they have to turn onto Woodruff and continue on up the southern part of Woodruff. So the best solutions come from listening to the people in the community, and that's what I do, is I listen and I want to bring forward the ideas that the community suggests.
And absolutely, the grassroots initiatives are great, and they're the ones that are going to be impacted by it. However, traffic calming measures and new signage and new laws and new restrictions only go so far. We were talking earlier about the lack of resources with the Ottawa Police Service. There's a long, long list of traffic enforcement priorities, but there's not enough resources for them to accomplish it. This week alone, there was a driver caught near a high school in a school zone doing 110 and a 40. Luckily enough, there was an officer there to catch them. But time and time again, we see people running school bus with their lights, sometimes 10 vehicles at one stop. Not 10 over the entire day, 10 at one stop. We need to be proactive, not reactive. We don't need to have a child run over by somebody speeding or jumping around a bus or jumping up a curb. We need to build that infrastructure and that enforcement in advance.
We also need to do a better job of planning. Here we are looking at major developments going up on roads that are already very busy, and we're looking at putting more cars into that stream. So let's rethink those projects, and let's listen to the people that live in the neighborhood who can tell you what the conditions are now. So this is one of the #1 complaints I get. We're putting in new developments that are going to even further jam up our system. So let's work together and see what we can do, because this is not working.
You're absolutely right, because they will jam up the system and thereby cutting through more and more through the neighborhoods and the residential areas. But just as an example, it took us 8 years to lobby our councillor and city council to finally get some kind of speed calming measures along Alpine Avenue. They were just installed last week, shortly before the end of term. 8 years it took us. This is not the way on how to reduce traffic and speeding. It's like when there's an issue, we have to address it immediately. And we have to address it immediately and not wait for a budget somewhere down the road to get it. It's like, no, the neighbors have a problem here. It's a serious problem. Let's address it and solve the problem. And this is what I will do when I will be the next councillor for Bay Ward.
This is something actually, Marc, that is actually very important to say, because you're just talking about the waiting line for these projects to come in, and that's a budget issue. How is it that these things are not the most important thing, that people's safety is not the most important thing?
And that's the issue, is we're too busy spending money building new projects and new infrastructure, and we're not maintaining and taking care of our existing. You know, Marc touched on Alpine Avenue taking 8 years. Woodruff Avenue Public School has taken a number of years. But beyond just traffic safety, you look at the area around Britannia, and it's been flooding for well over a century. And countless councillors had promised back in as early as the 80s, if not earlier, to fix the problem. It only finally started getting completed after it got re-raised in the 2014 debate by myself, that Councillor Taylor finally took the promises to heart and started rolling that ball and getting things fixed. That shouldn't take that long. We need to be proactive as opposed to being reactive.
I think we can all agree that there's an issue. We've heard it at the doors, we've heard it from the residents, and we've probably experienced it ourselves in our own neighborhoods. I think Theresa raised a good point. It's a budgetary issue as well. It's also a planning issue. Perhaps maybe when one development goes on one street, we don't think about the traffic management consequences. But when a street like Alpine gets half a dozen or a dozen in a 2-year period, then we've done ourselves a disservice by not asking for that traffic management plan. I think we need to look at the expenditures, we need to look at the revenue, and we need to get to a point where we're being responsible for our core services, and safety should be one of our core services.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Marc Lugert, I asked you the question, so you get the final 30 seconds on road safety.
Thanks. Traffic is probably the single most important issue in our ward, aside from some neighborhoods having issues very strongly with infill. Traffic is important. It's like we have heard before that we put more and more units on road infrastructure that is actually out of the 30s or before that. Traffic will increase, so we have to find ways on how to alleviate that. We have to find ways on how to get our neighbors safe in moving across the street.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Don Dransfield. How would you rate the city's financial situation, and what would you do to improve it?
There's a lot of questions about the city's financial solution or financial situation. I don't believe the solution is to increase taxes. I think, well, not more than 2% anyway. Currently, we have a number of different things that are, well, besides property tax. There are other ways to increase the amount of money that the city has, and some of those are grants from the federal and provincial government, and I think we need to take advantage of more of those. And also there's the property tax on new buildings, the new construction. So I don't really see a need to increase the rate of tax higher than the 2%.
Okay, it's open to everyone now on this topic.
Taxes have... Go ahead.
Please.
Thank you. Taxes have been on a steady rise for the past 8 years, and steady above inflation, the real inflation within Canada. We're now paying over 17% more in accrued taxes and property taxes than we did 8 years ago. So even if we say it's like, oh yeah, 2%, it's only a 2% increase. It's a 2% increase on another 2% increase on another 2% increase. So our taxes are going up, our cost of living is going up, and especially our neighbors who are on fixed incomes, pensions, or whatever, they sometimes cannot afford their homes anymore because of an increase in taxes and the way taxes are being managed or calculated in Ontario. The city has a $3.43 billion city budget, and I don't believe it's necessarily a revenue issue the city has. It's more an expenditure issue, and we should look at ways on how to reduce, as I call it, like the financial waste within departments and within the city.
One of the things that I see is that we need to spend smart. This means that we're making investments. Every time we spend money, it should be considered an investment. So if we're going to do something, we're going to fix something, make sure it's fixed so that we don't come back over and over again and cause an expense over and over again. So there's a lot of ways that we have to look at it. We have to examine how we're spending that money, make sure it's well spent. And some investments are social services. That's an investment. That is something that will help our community overall. There's a lot of ways to look at these things, but the lens we should use is this good for us in the long term? And if it is, then it's an investment.
Absolutely. Like, we need to have, residents need to feel like they're getting value from their tax dollars, be it through efficiencies, be it through an increase. Nobody likes taxes that I've ever met. No one likes taxes. But no one wants to see a drastic slash to their services either. Those core services need to be maintained. And doing things right the first time is a priority. Anyone who lives in Bay Ward knows Carling Avenue. And anyone knows who's traveled on Carling Avenue knows that it's been ripped up. I've lost count how many times in the last 20 years. Why wasn't it done the first time correctly? And we need to be respectful of those tax dollars because they are not an unlimited resource.
I agree with you. It's basically the infrastructure which has to be in place first, and it's like, and we have to repair our infrastructure and then look what else we can do with the money. It's like we need to heal the scratch before it becomes an open wound. Right now, we're just plastering a little bit here and a little bit there, especially on residential roads. Instead of saying it's like, well, let's take it all out, let's repave it, and it's going to be good for another 10 years or so. It's a lot cheaper in the mid and the long run to do that way than always finding little ways on just putting a Band-Aid on and then being surprised that it's going to tear up again.
I'm about being wise with our money. We can get better results with the same money that that we're actually already raising through taxes. We don't necessarily need a tax increase. Sometimes you can get more from a good town hall than you can actually get from a high-priced consultant. So we need to figure out where we're spending our money and where we can spend less of it and make sure that the programs that we want to have done are done correctly.
Okay, so has everybody sort of given their perspective on where tax increases should be over the next 4 years? I know a couple of you have said in the range of 2%. Does everyone agree with that, or is there a risk that that's putting too much pressure, as some people suggest, on city expenditures in areas like social services?
I'm really concerned if it means that we're having to cut things that are about safety, especially safety for children. If it means that we cannot get crossing guards for a corner, then I'm really concerned about that. If we have to make a lineup for stoplights that we really, really need, that will make our roads safer, then I have a concern about that. So we have to look at ways to make sure that those items are not just put on hold, but that we deal with them as soon as possible. And we have to look at the revenue sources. We have to look and make sure that that's the way we can do it.
I think the tax rate is just a component of a larger revenue or budgetary conversation. It's easy for us to say that we would keep it at 2% or never exceed inflation. Right now, we have a thinness. In your household budget, you only have a finite amount of money. So you have to weigh what you're able to do with that money, and then you have to dispense with some things that you're not able to do. You have to make important choices. The answer is not just raising revenues through raising property tax. The answer is also looking at your expenditures, understanding what the demands, the needs, and the priorities of the city are, and ensuring that you're paying for those first.
I don't think anyone's going to say that public safety isn't a paramount priority. And drawing a hard line in the sand at 2% may not be the most prudent gesture. Looking at inflation and having a little bit of give and take, because there are things that fluctuate. There is the need for an unexpected project, because there's been so much spending out of reserves that we don't have that buffer to fall back to. So we need to look at the big picture as opposed to just 2%, 2%, 2%.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think we should look at expenditure first and how we are spending it. It's like, as Theresa was saying, it's just like there are certain issues that should have like a priority in it. It's like, for example, safety, road safety, personal safety, and before we go forward and say it's like, oh, it's easy to go to council and say like, let's raise taxes for another 0.5%. It's just like, it's only going to cost, I don't know, $20 per property. It's just like, this is not the solution to it. It's like as a city, it's the single source of revenue is taxes, and our single most important source of revenue. Why don't we just look at our expenditures first and see like where we can streamline certain things and reduce a certain waste? Why don't we have our employees, empower our employees to make real decisions instead of hiring outside corporations constantly that are taking a load of our taxes and our costs? And I believe it's important is like just the wasteful behavior with our tax dollars should be under control.
Absolutely. I think what would work well is have an open door town hall style policy where our employees, because there are many heads at work and those people have different ideas and they can be brought forward within those departments that they can suggest efficiency, be it anonymously, if that's easier, because nobody wants to risk their job, for example. But we need to not just pigeonhole ourselves into one way of thinking, and we need to broaden the perspective and be open-minded.
One of the things I worked with at the school board was on the audit committee. I was chair of it. And it was about examining and making sure we spent the money well. This is something we're trusted with public dollars, and we want to make sure that it's well spent.
All right, Don Dransfield, I asked you the question, so you get the final 30 seconds on this. Go ahead.
I'm a centrist. I'm not about cuts, and I'm not about raising taxes. I'm about doing things better, utilizing the money that we're generating from taxes the best way we can. I'd like to be able to do things where we, like I've said before, you can usually get more information from a town hall than from a high-paid consultant. So let's use our money wisely and not have to raise taxes to begin with.
Okay, next question is to Trevor Robinson. Should the City of Ottawa opt out of having private cannabis stores? And if not, should there be one in Bay Ward? And what other steps does the city need to take to make sure that there's a smooth transition to legal marijuana?
I like the irony that the youngest candidate on the line here gets this question. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to cannabis. The Canadian Forces came out recently and they created their policy, and they're saying that members can smoke cannabis or consume cannabis 8 hours prior to a shift. Well, you look at commercial drivers, for example, and they're being told currently that they shouldn't consume anything for weeks prior to driving. So I think there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to figure out what's a good fit, what's a good fit within the city, within
It's open to everyone now, but you can keep going if you want.
Well, one of the things that I regret is that the provincial government has put it into private hands. I would have liked to have seen an LCBO style stores that to deal with this so that it's more controlled and we could have a tighter regulation. That's something I think would have been very, very useful. And it's unfortunate it isn't. But being as we have to deal with this, one of my biggest concerns is about zoning. As a school board trustee, I want to make sure that these are not near schools. This is something that's very important.
I actually believe it doesn't really matter if they're in private hands or if they're in public hands, where the distribution, how the distribution is organized. Important is that the neighborhoods actually have a say, and if they want to or would allow a private or public dispensary of cannabis in their immediate neighborhood or not. It's like, why don't we just go out and ask them and then decide if, like, well, maybe Bay Ward is not open for this, or maybe Centretown is not open for this, or maybe another region is open for it. And it doesn't really matter if it's private or public or LCBO style or some corner store. The regulations will be tough enough for anything. It's like we see it with cigarettes, we see it with alcohol, we see it with alcohol also in Quebec. And it's important to see, it's like, let's bring it out to the neighborhoods. It's like, would you be open for it, yes or no? And Some of them will, and some of them won't, but ask them. Ask them instead of legislating against something over their head.
I think we need to ask the constituents of Bay Ward if they do want it, but I don't think it's fair to necessarily ban a business from opening in a particular field anywhere in a particular entire ward. However, I think there should be restrictions on where these would be allowed to open. Nowhere near schools, on main streets, with particular signage that doesn't enhance young people, and where it's locked behind a counter and it's sold the same way you would sell a prescription in a drugstore. Anything other than that I don't think would be good for the community.
And I don't think anybody's going to say that putting a cannabis shop near a school is a good idea. That's just common sense. But one thing that I think a lot of residents, whether they're for or against having the cannabis shops, is we don't want to see it turn into something like the cash loan pop-ups where they're saturating a specific area. You look at Bay Ward, you look at a stretch along Richmond Road, and there's, I think it's 3 or 4 or 5, depending on which day of the week and who's open, different cash money pop-up shops. And it's just pulling at people and feeding on that, perception of a need. And I think cannabis shops will just do a similar thing. And we need to work with our neighbors and figure out what they want in their specific neighborhood, but we also need to work with our partners and ensure that there's proper enforcement to ensure that any laws and regulations in place are being respected.
I think small business is the engine of the economy, and retail cannabis outlets are coming to our city, coming to our province. I think we can use this as an opportunity to regulate. We can weigh in. We can ask residents. I mean, we'll hear dividing opinions. People are pro, people are against, but I think if we settle on their coming to the city, we need to also focus down on the regulations, on the zoning, where, when, how they're going to be open, the same way we did with the LCBO, the same way we've regulated cigarettes and other substances.
And it's going to be way more complicated than that, even because we have to look at apartment building use. We have to look at common areas. We went through this with tobacco control. And so we've got these same discussions to have. We want to make it fair. It's going to be a legal substance, but at the same time, it can be very offensive to a lot of people. So there's a lot of balancing to do. Unfortunately, it's all been kind of dumped on municipalities to deal with this.
I think we're also not talking about the fact that opening up retail outlets will likely lower down or slow down the black market for these substances, potentially relieving some of the violent crime in neighborhoods.
I'm torn whether it'll reduce the black market, because it's a market. There will be lower prices and undercutting in that to try and still sell that product. But I think the bigger issue is we need to keep an eye on things as they change, not just here in Ottawa, but we need to look at other jurisdictions and how they've done things and learn those takeaways and try and figure out a best practice. And ideally, in a perfect world, from a perspective from politics, it'd be great if they were in public hands and we could tax them to no end so that we're able to afford that enforcement, because now the city is going to be burdened with that enforcement and there's no revenue coming through from the province. And even the province isn't getting the revenue that the perception was there prior, that when it would have been an LCBO style shop.
I think also it's like if you look, for example, in other jurisdictions or countries like the Netherlands, who have had decades of experience with private use and consumption of cannabis. Cannabis nowadays is only allowed to be consumed officially within coffee shops. Private people, of course, do it in their household and wherever they want to consume it. Nevertheless, the regulations have been tightened up. So tourists, especially in the city of Amsterdam, for example, are not being bothered by it anymore. But as Don was saying, this is like a private company can offer the product, and we as a city can provide the regulations for it. And that way we're basically offering like a new market.
I think what a lot of people are forgetting to look at it is whether it was in a public entity like LCBO or in a private entity, it's going to create jobs. And that's something else that needs to be weighed in when people are deciding, hey, do I want this in my backyard or not? because there is that opportunity, in theory, for a well-paying job beyond minimum wage, and that may be a pro for a lot of people, whether they consume it or not, to be able to have that access to a well-paying job within walking distance within the ward. And that's something that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's something that needs to be kept at the forefront as well.
But again, it's the neighbours and the neighbourhoods who should decide if they want to have something like that in their immediate vicinity or not. So it comes back, it's like you decide, it's basic democratic basically, and saying it's like this is what it is, and we should be bound by the results of the neighbourhoods within Bay Ward.
It's a shame that it wasn't thought out quicker and proactively enough to perhaps put it on this fall's ballot and let people choose directly at the time of the election.
Okay. Trevor Robinson, I asked you the question, so you actually get the last 30 seconds on this. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. Just to reiterate the option about putting it on a ballot, obviously that's passed, but we need to have town halls. We need to be cognizant of what residents want in their backyard, so to speak, and what they don't want. There will be a difference of opinion. There's people who are in favor who consume it. There's people who are against it who consume it. We need to slow things down as much as we can and try and do this right.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're now going to move to the closing statements. Once again, each candidate will have 1 minute to speak to you, the voters, in Bay Ward, and we will do the closing statements in the reverse order of the opening statements, which means we will begin with Trevor Robinson. Go ahead, you have 1 minute.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you to the team here at Rogers for having us, and especially the team behind the scenes. Again, my name is Trevor Robinson. I'm here to provide the residents of Bay Ward with fresh representation, someone who has experience representing 3 times the population size of Bay Ward. And that choice would be to vote for Trevor Robinson. So you want someone who's driven, vote for Trevor Robinson. You want someone who's down to earth, someone that you can strike up a conversation with at a local event or at a coffee shop or at a red light. Vote for Trevor Robinson. If you're looking for someone who's thinking ahead, someone who wants to pass on to future generations a great ward to live in, as opposed to someone who's just campaigning for the next election, vote for Trevor Robinson. If you want a positive change, vote for Trevor Robinson. Thank you for taking the time to watch this debate, and I hope, regardless of who you vote for, that you do take the time to vote in October.
All right, thank you. Don Dransfield, you're next. You have 1 minute as well.
I'm not going to give you simplistic answers to complicated problems, like raising taxes or cutting services. I believe in finding ways to do things smarter. I will apply my business experience to make sure we are getting the best value for our tax money by building partnerships and utilizing the creativity and innovation of the people of Bay Ward. By spending money wisely, we will have more for priorities like housing, transit, and recreational infrastructure. We need to make sure, especially young people, we need to make sure we have opportunities they need to succeed, especially young people. We need affordable childcare and safe spaces for children to play. And we need a long-term vision for development of our community. I know the best solutions come from the people closest to the problem. I'm making one promise. I will be available. If you need something from the city and you have a good idea, you'll be able to find me. I'm asking for your vote on October 22nd.
All right, thank you. Marc Lugert, you're next. Go ahead.
We have great neighbourhoods in this great ward. However, our infrastructure is crumbling. Our property taxes increase faster than real inflation. Fees for using city services like OC Transport are on a steady rise. All of this made me realize that I could not stand idle while neighbourhoods and the city I love are deteriorating. As your neighbour and your next councillor for Bay Ward, I will move to fix our infrastructure first before it is lost. I will move to provide our security and rescue services the means so they can perform their job to the fullest and keep us safe and protect us. I will work with you to create meaningful community design plans that have teeth. I will work to create a budget process that is transparent and meets our wishes and our concerns. I will stand up for us, so our voices will finally be heard and our issues will finally be addressed. After all, only strong neighbourhoods make a proud city. You can find more about me by visiting marclugert.ca, and thank you, Marc and Rogers TV and the crew for this opportunity.
All right, thank you. Erica Dath, you're next. Go ahead, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Rogers and Marc Sutcliffe, for hosting and moderating this event. Today, I believe I have shown you that I'm a credible candidate with years of experience in public service. I understand the bureaucratic process, and I have felt firsthand the impacts of the city's complicated systems. I will focus on responsible development, respecting our neighborhoods and communities, and working to ensure that infrastructure is able to keep up. I will fight to sit on the planning committee so that I have a direct say on the development decisions impacting our ward. I will work to address our traffic issues. I will ask the difficult questions, understand your needs, and be available, transparent, and open and honest in communication. I will be bold. I will speak truth to power. I will work for you. My name is Erica Dath. I'm a politically independent candidate seeking your support to become the next City Councillor of Bay Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. Theresa Kavanagh, you have 1 minute as well. Go ahead.
Thank you. Bay Ward is a network of unique and diverse neighborhoods built over 55 years ago plus. It's aging infrastructure. It needs updating. There's storm sewers that need replacing, recreation facilities such as Wood Park Fieldhouse that need replacing. It also has awe-inspiring green spaces like Britannia Park and Frank Ryan Woods. And these are things that we need to protect. But one of Bay Ward's best resources is its residents. The sense of community, the sense of neighborhood here is phenomenal. This is no longer just a sleepy little suburb. This isn't your parents' suburb. This is a vibrant, growing community. I want to work with the residents of Bay Ward and keep that sense of timing, or a sense of community, and make our streets as safe as possible. And we need to have good services. Whether you're a senior trying to get to the bus stop in the winter or a child trying to get to school who needs a crossing guard, these are services that we must provide. I want to work with you to welcome new neighbors.
That's time. Thank you. Thank you to all the candidates for participating in the debate for Bay Ward, and good luck the rest of the campaign. And thank you for watching. I want to remind you that Election Day is October the 22nd. That's when you'll be able to vote in Bay Ward and throughout the city of Ottawa. Rogers TV and 1310 News Radio will have live coverage and analysis of the election results starting at 8 o'clock when the polls close. Hope you can join us then. Thanks for watching.